Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And I'm really delighted today to be talking about the intergalactic adventures of Max Cloud with writer-director Martin Owen and actor Scott Adkins. And I wanted to start with you, Martin, in asking a little bit about the process in writing this script, because it's a world within a world. So I was interested in the unique challenges that came with writing the script for this, not only in having to map out the overall narrative arc of the story, but also really having to construct the video game that we see within the movie, but also really think about what that narrative of the video game would be and how it fits into the overall plot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was, I think it was kind of like, it meant the writing process would kind of split into two really. So myself and Sally Collett, who I wrote the script with, we basically kind of came up with the concept first, the overall idea, then the sort of arc for this sort of, if you like, the real world story, and then separately came up with what we wanted it to be within the, that was getting too complex, within the sort of narrative of the game real world, but then how that would work with a supposed real video game as well. So it was kind of, we were going through like, that should work, that should work, that should work. And then it was also tricky when we made the movie in post-production, making sure that that was the moment when we really realized, man, if this was a real game, would it actually work? Like, would there be progress through the levels? It would suddenly be here, then you'd be there. But it did, luckily it worked well, actually.
Yeah. And for you, Scott, I was interested in how you approached your character, because obviously he exists solely within this video game world, but you still kind of get to have that fun moment where we have a little bit of a flashback sequence. We learn a little bit about his backstory, but his emotional landscape as a character is very different to anyone that you've approached before. So I was interested in how you deconstructed who he was and built out the different layers of him differently to other characters that you've played.
Well, I think Martin just said, listen, he's a bit of a dick, so just be yourself. So I was like, oh, okay. I'll do my best. No, obviously it's he's just one of these big brash, 90s, 80s action hero archetypal guys that thinks he's got all the answers. And his arc really is to realize that, oh no, I don't know it all, and I'm not as cool as I thought I was, and I've got pretty much no social skills whatsoever. But when it comes to fighting and killing heinous scum, there's nobody better. But in terms of being a good guy, and I've still got a lot to learn. So I just went big, and I kept saying to Martin, do you think this is too much? And he'd be like, no, man, I love it. Go bigger. So it's a situation where, I'd never done a broad comedy like this before, or something this big and out there. So I just really had to trust that Martin was going to look after me, which he did.
So,
well, that's an interesting point in terms of, Martin, how you worked with all of the cast, because like Scott was saying, he had to make a lot of big choices and very bold choices, and you really have to commit to that. And with something like this, it's also really important to have all of the cast on the same page and to be bringing that same tone to their performances. So how did you work with each of them individually to make sure that everybody was going to bring their performances to the same page so that it would feel really cohesive across all of their performances?
I think it was probably not a million miles away from the conversation that Scott and I had, in terms of that, it was better to kind of go big, and then if needed to, we could bring it back, because the whole thing had to be exaggerated and over the top, because they're kind of like, video game characters come to life. So, the kind of the good guys have to be ridiculously kind of over the top, and the bad guys have to be ridiculously evil. So it was kind of like with, say, John Hannah, who plays Revenge, or the key thing was just like, just have fun with this and don't be afraid to go big. If we need to, we'll dial it back. But that was kind of the main thing with everybody. Embrace your character and probably do it twice as big as you naturally feel that you need to.
Yeah. And Scott, within that arrogance and the choices that you make in your performance, it's really fun to watch, because even down to the tone of voice that you choose for him as a character, the way that he kind of has to physically move, it's all kind of playing into that character and really giving a lot to each scene. How did you kind of work with the scripts beforehand and work with Martin to figure out what that physicality was going to be, what his voice was going to be as a character?
I don't know if we had that much time to have all these discussions, did we? I mean, it was pretty clear from reading it and the conversation that we had what the character was. I mean, it's hard because, you know, we're a couple of years away from film and it's hard to remember exactly what was said at the time. But I just remember having conversations about you're playing an action hero, but all the sort of dicky, not cool sides of an action hero, we want to bring those to the forefront. You know, he thinks he's cool, but maybe he isn't. Yes, he's a great fighter, but he's got zero social skills, all these sorts of things. And, you know, it was a free set. It was a comfortable set where you felt like you could, you know, ad lib a line or try something crazy. And, you know, Martin kept it very light. And sometimes I would think, man, are we just messing about too much here? What are we doing? Were we actually getting paid for this? Because, you know, it really had a feeling of just having quite a laugh sometimes. But I think that's what you needed, right? To feel like you could experiment and just try silly things.
Yeah. And was that kind of lightness that you brought to the conversations together similar for when you're working on a scene, specifically when you're filming something, when you're trying to figure out what the different versions of it should be for additional takes, and kind of giving notes and feedback to each other as you discuss between takes?
Yeah, I think also it's the film was a fine line because, as Scott said, you know, it was made sure everyone was having fun. It was quite a relaxed environment, so therefore the comedy would come out and the performers would feel relaxed. But also there's a fine line because obviously with the action stuff, you know, particularly from Scott's perspective, obviously that stuff is like, you know, it's so detailed and so nuanced and almost like the opposite of what we just said. You know, it has the attention to detail. There really isn't many messing around. So it was kind of very strange to have those kind of two things running parallel throughout the movie. And obviously I sort of lent towards Scott on that stuff more because that's his expertise, is the action stuff, and mine's been ridiculous. So
I think some of the conversations I remember having with you, Martin, was to pinpoint those areas where my character, who's in a game and he thinks it's real, he's starting to figure out, hang on a minute, something's not quite right here, because other people in this world, in the game, they know they're in a game, but my character doesn't, and it's starting to cotton onto it. Hang on, there's something a bit strange about this, and finding those little moments like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting because, as Scott said, it's kind of within the movie hits a point where the game happens, it repeats over and over and over, and they do the same thing every day. But within the story of the movie and the narrative, suddenly everything that's happening is new, and it's new for Max and it's new for the other guys. And as Scott said, suddenly there's moments where Max is kind of, hang on a second, something's not right here.
And Scott, I wanted to talk a little bit about your work within action films, because I think one of the things that often gets underestimated with the skill set that you bring to that genre is the necessity to be so specific in terms of the movements, the motions that you're doing, the choreography of that scene, really thinking about where the camera is going to be, because the camera is often very close up for a lot of fight and action sequences in movies, and there's often a lot of movement, a lot of quick edits. And at the same time, you're really kind of still bringing the central focus back to your character all of the time. And it's something that you've mastered so well through all your performances. But I was really fascinated by when you first started out in that realm, kind of how you worked to navigate those different spaces and to pull that together into a central character performance within those types of scenes.
Well, it is a lot to think about, yeah, and you have to be very precise, because if you're not precise and somebody makes a mistake, something's off, you know, you can end up hitting the camera guy, you can end up hitting the stunt performer can hit you. You know, you've always got to think, you've got to be one step ahead in your mind with choreography, where things are moving so quickly that, you know, as soon as you make a mistake, you're going to get hit, somebody could get hurt. But I've done it for so many years now that it's obviously second nature. And that's when you can just go with the flow, get in the flow of that, and you're able to think about all the other things like the performance of the character and even like making slight little adjustments in the fight. That all comes with experience. But it is a tricky thing. I sometimes forget how difficult it is because we're doing it for so long. But it takes some doing. It's a skill set in itself. Screen fighting, completely different from real fighting. You know, there's so much to take on.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you both a little bit about working with Andy Long, who was the action choreographer on this film. And, you know, he's such a master of his art and comes from Jackie Chan's crew. And, you know, it sounds like he was such a key component in terms of not just choreographing the scenes, but also in helping to figure out where the camera should be and how that should move and flow within the action. So I wanted to ask you both about that experience of working with him and what he really brought to the table with such a unique perspective and experience.
Yeah, Scott, do you want to lead on this, and I'll jump in after if you want?
Well, yeah, for me, I was just very happy that Andy is there and so experienced in the things that he's done before with Jackie Chan's stunt team. For me, it makes me, I can sit back and not worry about the action because I know that I've got someone there that I can trust that's got my back and is going to do a great job. And so I was able to just do as I was told by him, know that he's going to do good work and think about the character and what was going to have for lunch. So, you know, I was very happy that Andy was there.
And I think for me, it was interesting because kind of, you know, I've worked with second unit directors and stuff before, but in the sense of this sort of movie, it's really like you're like handing them, you know, have all these conversations with Andy, and then you're like handing the movie over for that amount of time, and I'm sort of stood back watching like, holy shit, you know, this is. But the first sequence that I saw everyone do together, I was like, oh wow, okay, this is impressive, you know. And it was good because Andy, obviously, they had a good process of the way they prepped it and discussed it, and they obviously lay out the way they want to work action wise, but also are considerate to what we need story beats wise and character wise, because all of that comes into those little mini movies, which is the fight. So that was great. It was really nice to sort of, and impressive to see someone work the way that Andy and his team did. It was fantastic.
It was interesting.
Yeah, and Martin,
each fight is like a different style, isn't it? Each action sequence is like, they all feel like they're in a video game, but they're all a certain variation of that style, which I found really interesting. That, you know, the first bit's like a Street Fighter type thing, and you've got me like moving like a computer game player, and the middle bit is my favorite. That action sequence is really cool, and then at the end, it's completely like in a computer game.
Yeah, no, it's really fun watching, like you said, those different styles and kind of the different influences, like something like Street Fighter, and how that really comes into the motion of those sequences. What was that journey in terms of mapping out what the different dynamics of the action sequences and the fight sequences were going to be, with the fact that they do have those different identities throughout the film?
Yeah, I think it was just a lot of, we were lucky to have Andy and the guys over with enough time before that, you know, that we could discuss the different influences and the different styles. And, you know, and as Scott mentioned, it's not just doing the different styles for the sake of it. It's kind of the way that the metamorphosis of the fight styles move with the arc of the story, you know, and in particular Max. So it was really good. It was a process I really enjoyed, you know, that side of it, and, you know, making the action have an extra sort of meaning to the overall arc of the story. It was great. And those guys were fantastic. I was super impressed. I was stood there all the time. Oh, like watching stuff is like very impressed. First time I saw Scott do something, I was just like, holy sh-. I don't know how to swear, but I was just honestly absolutely blown away. It was pretty impressive, to be honest. I just like assumed, like, because we cheat so much stuff in films, and I was just like, I didn't realize that like Scott could literally do everything that he does. It was honestly mind-boggling. Everyone was like, "Did you see that?" I was like, "I know, that was pretty impressive."
Hey, it was even harder with that suit on, so you know.
Yeah, the suit. Yeah.
Right, and I wanted to ask about the costumes in it, because they're so fantastically brilliant and obviously designed so specifically to that time period. And was there thought beyond just the visuals of the costumes for the necessity of the flow that was needed, kind of the type of fabrics that would be needed in order for those sequences to be able to work really well in terms of the action, and just having fabric that's still going to kind of have that solidity of a video game feel, but also really move for Scott and the rest of the cast?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could lie and say that I was obviously up to consider it to the action and everything, but I wasn't. It was more just obsessing over trying to find what outfit and costume looks the most sort of like this, right from the sort of Buck Rogers up until the last Starfighter, anywhere in that era. What is the most ludicrous outfit you can get Scott to agree to wear?
Do you know what was amazing though? What I found amazing is every movie I do, and I should be sponsored by these guys, I always wear Palladium boots
Yeah.
because they're very light and I can move in them, but they look like boots. And they had white Palladium boots as part of that costume. I was like, wow, wasn't expecting this.
They look great as well. The thing was, like, we had some, it was really strange because we had some different shoes and boot options and they didn't look quite right. And then Scott said, oh, I always wear Palladiums. Let's see if I've got some white ones. Honestly, they also looked perfect with the outfit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so it was from me.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
It was from you. It was from you, Scott. Yeah.
Okay.
I also heard that in terms of the production of the sets that you created, that one of the video game sets was actually a set from another movie that you took and kind of repurposed and repainted and redesigned, and was really interested in how that came about, how you managed to get kind of a central set piece that was from another movie and how you really used it to create this very, very distinct visual world that you do.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the set, the main deck of the ship. It was that one that was repurposed from another movie that had just been made in the studio. But when we kind of inherited it, it was a much more sort of like traditional sci-fi spaceship deck, main deck. It was kind of, lots of greys and silvers and, a much more, I guess, sophisticated science fiction spaceship. So my main thing was, how can we take this that looks great and make it look as ludicrous as possible? Because the thing was, all the time there's all these little things in the movie, like the actual spaceship at the start, when it's kind of tumbling down at the start of the movie, the outside of it actually hasn't had the VFX guys put an on and off switch on it. So it's like, like a toy would have, like a toy car would have. So the spaceship was kind of purposed to look as though it was like a spaceship version of like a sort of like a little toy car. So the inside of it was supposed to was bridging that gap between, I wanted it to look deliberately a little bit fake and over the top and a bit like it should be on a children's TV show, but also not go so far that it can't serve the purpose for any drama within the story as well.
Yeah, I also love visually the juxtaposition between the ship and then obviously you've got Sarah's bedroom where she's sitting playing the video game, and they both have very distinct styles, but also even just through choices like the color palette that you're using and the way that you film those sets, it still feels really cohesive. So how did you kind of determine at the beginning of going into pre-production what you wanted that overall kind of cohesive aesthetic for this film to be between those two worlds?
Yeah, I think really it was a lot of, me personally, I'm kind of influenced by a lot of movies of that era, like I mentioned, like The Last Starfighter and Goonies and stuff like that. And it was kind of like making sure that the bedroom and the real world was very much, felt like it was of that time and of that era and of that style. And then to be honest, it was just then once we designed the video game, it was then designing Max's world based on essentially that, making it look like a true to life, our best guess of a true to life 1990 video game would look like.
Yeah. And Scott, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the comedy within this, because what's really fun about the delivery is that it's never kind of outwardly going for the joke and acknowledging that you're delivering a joke as your character. It's kind of a little bit winking to the camera. It almost feels like, even just when he's like, Max Cloud always walks into the room first and refers to himself in third person. So how did you land on what you wanted the specificity of that comedic delivery within the script to be for your character?
I think you've got to try and play the truth of the situation. Doesn't matter how absurd it is. I mean, that's the only way I would know how to approach it. Is just to go with the scenario and do it as truthfully and as honest as possible. And the comedy's going to come from the fact that I'm just oblivious to how much of a dick I'm coming across as, or whatever it may be. I mean, the dialogue is whatever it was, but for me, I would just try and do it as truthfully as possible. And I suppose there were some other times when I just would go big and he would say, more, brilliant, go bigger. And that's the kind of the way it went, I think.
I loved at one point that you mentioned that you saw a little bit of Ron Burgundy from Anchorman in kind of that arrogance and the style of character that he was. Yeah. Were there any kind of other references that you really pulled in for yourself, or was that kind of the central one that you looked to in terms of other characters in the ether?
I mean, I understand the whole being a stoic action hero thing. I mean, that's a world I've been stuck in, and that's a cliche that you don't want to fall into that bracket, but it's kind of hard not to. So I understood that's the pitfalls of that, which is what we wanted for this. You know, so as on other movies, it's like, well, we don't want to do that cliche thing, and then this was, you know, do the cliche because that's who the character is, and so there was that. But also, yeah, Ron Burgundy just kept popping in there, and the fact that he's just a huge doofus seemed to work for this part.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the camera work and the choices that you make in the way that you film it, because you know, even down to the fact when you've got a character playing a video game and we're seeing, you know, the VFX that you've created for what that game looks like on a television screen, and then we're jumping into the world of the video game itself, you really have to kind of think about what those shots are going to look like, and how that's going to map together, how it's going to feel like you're in a game, how it's going to kind of like be a little bit more static when you're in the bedroom. So kind of what was that journey in terms of figuring out what the different camera motions were going to be within these two different worlds? And again, just kind of like, but still having it all feel like it's all one of the same world at the same time.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of luck. I think that it's really, to be honest, I think we looked and we said, look, we decided on a kind of a movement and a way that the movie happens in the bedroom, and it's kind of much more, it's more static, it's a little bit more organic. But then in the game, it's much more, it's kind of on the move a lot more. You know, the camera's always moving, not all the time, but it's predominantly doing something. It's going backwards or forwards or sideways. And it was, again, like we did with the fights, we were mindful of trying to make sure that as much as possible, the cinematography was reflecting the way that the digital camera would work in a kind of side-scrolling video game. And then there's moments where it's moving behind them or in front of them. So it was really just kind of taking the influence and looking at this kind of the 16-bit video games. That was, I think, the biggest influence of the style within the movie.
Yeah. And then Scott, you know, in terms of what the video game itself on that television screen actually looked like, was it useful for you to have conversations with Martin early on to understand what that was going to look like, to see kind of any of the visuals? Or was it kind of not relevant because everything that you're doing as a character is living within the world that he's recreating and filming anyway?
No, it wasn't necessary for how I was going to play it, but I do remember early on in the process, as soon as I got to the studio, he took me into the art department to show me some pictures of Max Cloud and you know, get an idea of how colorful it was and just an idea of what it was like in the game. And that was really exciting for me. One thing I wanted to ask you, do you have an idea of Martin, do you have an idea of what the console was that she's playing on? What game console would it be? Do you know? Did you make that decision? Or?
Yeah, Sega Genesis.
Sega Genesis.
Yeah, Sega Mega Drive in the UK, but yeah, Genesis in the US. Yeah, that's what we always made sure as well, that like even like the colors and everything in the game they're based more on a Genesis than say like a Super Nintendo. So yeah, I always
in terms of those scenes where you have characters essentially just sitting in a room playing a video game, you know, there's still kind of dialogue and character moments, but how did you kind of work from a filmmaking standpoint to make sure that those scenes were still going to be just as visually engaging and bring just as much energy as moments where we're within the game itself?
I think, it was definitely tricky, and it was a concern of like, you know, are these scenes just going to be, particularly because obviously Sarah kind of, you know, ends up in the game pretty quick. So it's kind of, there's a lot in the kind of real world on the shoulders of Franz, who plays Cowboy. But again, I think that, you know, like we kind of ended up being with Scott, and kind of very, you know, obviously trusting of Scott's performance and vice versa, you know, Scott back to myself, it was the same with Franz in particular, that, you know, he would try things and mess about with stuff. And that was really the key thing. If it felt like in the room it was going to be flat, then we knew it would be flat on camera. So it was making sure that it wasn't. And he was very good. And, you know, he's a very funny guy. I was laughing quite a lot of the stuff he was doing.
And for both of you in the journey and the process of making this film, what was the aspect of it that really kind of challenged you the most or pushed you the furthest outside of your comfort zone in putting this all together?
Well, for me, it was, the comedy side of things, which is something that I'd not, in some of my recent movies, I've been leaning more towards that side, but never anything as broad as this. So obviously that was a challenge, and it's uncharted territory, and it's not like you can get feedback when you do it. Like if you did it on the stage, obviously the crowd, they either laugh or they don't, right? If it's stand-up comedy, whether it's working. With this, you don't know if it's going to work until people see the movie. We still don't know, because we need to see what people think when they watch the movie. But so that was like just a different experience, completely different.
Yeah. I think for me it was I guess it was trying to make what ultimately is a very tricky and ambitious movie, that both in terms of its production, its values, and the fact, as Scott mentioned, it's a comedy, and the only gauge that I had on set was whether I thought something was funny. And I might, for all I know, have a really niche sense of humor. So, but
that's what I was thinking.
But that's really the radar, isn't it? It's kind of like, if you think it's funny on set, then I still watch the film and laugh at the same bits that I laughed at on set during the edit, and like I can just honestly, I find Scott hilarious. I can't. I really just I was gobsmacked how brilliant he was at the comedy, and it really, for me, it comes across so well.
But how did you make the decision that I might be able to do it? Because there was nothing to go off really, other than a conversation on the phone.
No, I don't know really. I just I think those things you kind of just, you just feel it, don't you? And it just kind of, I immediately felt as, oh yeah, he can definitely do this. And yeah, honestly, the stuff that Scott was doing on set was honestly, there's some gold, and like there's some brilliant outtakes as well that I hope people get to see, because there was some really, really funny stuff.
I'd like to see.
I hope we get a chance to see them at some point. Well, it's such a genuinely enjoyable film, and it's been such a pleasure talking to both of you this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Mara. Thank you.
Thanks, Mara.